My name is Elena, and I've worked in corporate environments for 15 years. I've seen it all from embezzlement scandals to inappropriate relationships that somehow never get reported. What I'm about to tell you happened at Nexus Digital, a mid-sized marketing firm, where I worked as a senior project coordinator. I thought I'd seen every type of office politics until I met Veronica Sterling. Veronica Sterling wasn't just beautiful, she was weaponized beauty. Tall, blonde, with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. She joined our company as marketing director 6 months ago, and within weeks, everyone knew she was sleeping with our CEO, Marcus Webb. What they didn't know was that our HR director, Janet Morrison, was not only aware of it, she was actively covering for them. The first red flag came during my quarterly review. I'd been managing the Henderson account, our biggest client, for 3 years. The campaign I'd developed had increased their revenue by 32%. But when I walked into Marcus's office, Veronica was there too, perched on the edge of his desk like she owned the place. Marcus barely looked at me. "Elena, we've decided to reassign the Henderson account to Veronica. She has some fresh ideas that could really take things to the next level." I kept my voice steady. "I'd be happy to collaborate with Veronica on new strategies, but I think my existing relationship with the client would be valuable to maintain." Veronica's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh sweetie, I think it's time for some new blood. Don't worry, I'll be sure to mention your contributions when I present the new campaign to the board next week." My campaign. The one I'd spent months developing. The one that was supposed to be my ticket to senior director. I smiled politely. "Of course. I'll have all the files transferred by end of day." But as I walked back to my desk, something clicked in my memory. Janet Morrison and I had worked together at Cromwell Industries 5 years ago. Back then, she was just an HR coordinator, and I was the one who recommended her for a promotion. More importantly, I remembered the ethics training we'd both attended, specifically the section about mandatory reporting of executive relationships. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched Veronica's reign of terror unfold. She took credit for the Henderson campaign's success, presenting it to the board as her own revolutionary strategy. She had Marcus fire Tom Rodriguez from accounting because he'd questioned an expense report that showed her charging personal shopping trips to the company card. When Lisa from customer service raised concerns about Veronica's unprofessional behavior with clients, she was suddenly let go for performance issues. Each time, Janet rubber-stamped the decisions. Each time, I documented everything. The breaking point came when Veronica set her sights on me directly. It started with little things being excluded from important meetings, having my project timelines mysteriously shortened, finding my parking spot reassigned to directors only. But then she crossed a line that would ultimately destroy her. During the monthly all-hands meeting, Marcus announced that Veronica would be promoted to Vice President of Marketing, a position that had been promised to me after my next successful campaign cycle. As applause filled the conference room, Veronica's eyes found mine across the table. She smiled that predatory smile of hers. "I just want to thank everyone for their support. And Elena, don't worry, there will always be coordinator positions available for people who are comfortable staying in their lane." The room fell silent. My 15 years of experience, my track record, my contributions reduced to staying in my lane. By someone who'd been here 6 months, and whose only qualification was sleeping with the boss. That night, I made a decision. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to the company's board of directors. But not just any email, one that would use every piece of corporate policy, every regulation, and every documented instance of misconduct I'd been collecting. You see, what Veronica and Marcus didn't know was that I'd been keeping meticulous records. Screenshots of Veronica charging personal expenses. Email threads showing her taking credit for others' work. Documentation of the wrongful terminations. And most damaging of all, evidence of Janet's failure to report the relationship as required by company policy and federal regulations. What they really didn't know was that my brother-in-law, David Chin, wasn't just any board member. He was the head of the audit committee, and he'd been looking for a reason to investigate Marcus's leadership for months. The company's stock had been underperforming, and there were whispers about questionable decisions coming from the CEO's office. My email was 12 pages long. It outlined every policy violation, every ethical breach, every instance of retaliation and wrongful termination. I attached financial records, email screenshots, and a detailed timeline of events. But the masterpiece was the section on fiduciary responsibility, how Marcus's personal relationship was compromising his judgment and costing the company both talent and money. I sent it at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night, knowing David would see it first thing Monday morning. By Tuesday, the board had called an emergency meeting. By Wednesday, an independent investigation was announced. By Friday, the real fireworks began. I was at my desk when Marcus's assistant rushed past, looking panicked. Through the glass walls of the executive conference room, I could see Marcus pacing while Veronica sat rigid in her chair. Janet was there too, clutching a folder that I knew contained her termination papers. The investigation had uncovered everything: the unreported relationship, the misuse of company funds, the wrongful terminations, the retaliation. But the final nail in the coffin was something even more delicious. Veronica's previous employer had called with some very interesting information about why she'd really left her last job. Turns out, this wasn't her first time sleeping with a boss. Or her first time getting caught. As the board members filed into the conference room, I watched through the glass partition. David Chen, who had no idea I was his sister-in-law, was leading the group. The lead investigator, a stern woman in a navy suit, was carrying a thick file that I knew contained my documentation. Marcus was no longer pacing. He was sitting very still, his face pale as the investigator began reading from the report. Veronica kept looking toward the door like she might make a run for it. Janet was openly crying. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The investigator turned to a specific page, the one detailing how the Henderson account success had been stolen from me, how my work had been presented as Veronica's innovation. She read my name aloud as the true architect of the campaign. Marcus's head snapped up. His eyes found mine through the glass, and for the first time in months, I saw real recognition there. Not the dismissive glance he'd been giving me, but the look of someone who finally understood exactly who they'd been underestimating. But it was Veronica's reaction that made the entire thing worthwhile. As the investigator continued reading, detailing how Veronica's fresh ideas were actually stolen from a subordinate, how her promotion had been based on fraudulent claims of achievement, her face went through a fascinating transformation. Confusion gave way to horror, horror to rage, and rage to something like panic. She whipped around to stare at me through the glass. For 6 months, I'd been invisible to her, just another drone to step on while she climbed her way to the top. Now, as the full scope of my documentation became clear, as she realized that every conversation, every email, every cruel comment had been carefully recorded and reported, she was finally seeing me. Really seeing me. I stood up from my desk, straightened my blazer, and walked slowly past the conference room. As I passed the glass wall, I paused and looked directly at Veronica Sterling. Then I smiled, not the polite, corporate smile I'd been giving her for months, but the smile of someone who had just played the longest, most satisfying game of chess in their career. Her mouth fell open as the final piece clicked into place. She wasn't just being fired. She wasn't just being demoted. Every bridge she'd burned, every person she'd stepped on, every cruel, stay in your lane comment, it was all coming back to destroy her. As I walked away, I heard the conference room door open behind me. Heavy footsteps. Shouting. The sound of someone who had finally realized that the quiet coordinator they'd been dismissing for months had just orchestrated their complete and total downfall. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, my heels clicking steadily on the polished floor, as Veronica Sterling's world collapsed behind me.